He was alert to the fact that the two events, one inner and the other outer, would have taken place at virtually the same moment, rather than automatically assuming that there could be no significant connection between the state of his watch and the state of his thinking, which would certainly be the usual assumption. His immediate intuition was of a larger field of meaning, underlying and patterning all that happened in the room at the time. In that field, events having no apparent causal connection in the conventional sense could be recognized as participating in a more subtly ordered whole, a larger pattern of meaning that was discernible to the prepared mind, even if that meaning challenged his conscious attitude. For Jung, the symbolic connection between the two events was as transparently intelligible as if he were reading a newspaper, and he acted accordingly. What made the correlation between the inner and outer events intelligible was the presence of two factors. First, a developed capacity for thinking and perceiving symbolically, a cultivated sensitivity to metaphoric and analogical patterns that connect and thereby illuminate diverse phenomena, and second, an epistemological openness to the possibility that such meaning can be carried by the outer world as well as the inner, by all of nature and one's surrounding environment, not just by the human psyche. Yet the recognition of synchronicities require subtle judgments made in circumstances usually pervaded by ambiguity and open to multiple interpretations. The suggestive patterning and often delicate precision of detail in such coincidences notoriously escape the net of objectivistic assessments and experimental tests. Synchronicities seem to constitute a lived reality, the experience of which depends deeply on the sensitive perception of context and nuance, for synchronicities have a shadow side, as in the exaggeration of the trivial, to discover a self-inflating meaning. Another form this shadow can take is the paranoid's morbidly narrow interpretation of coincidences in terms of other people's malign plots cunningly directed at the self, or psychotic delusions of self-reference. Such interpretations are, as Jung once suggested, pre-Copernican, egocentric. They center the world of meaning naively on the old narrow self, inflating the separate ego, or persecuting it, and thereby evade the more complex and often painful emergence of the individuated self that is in dialogue with the whole. Such an emergence requires attending to the claims and communications of the larger cosmos of the unconscious. A painstaking cultivation of self-knowledge must be undertaken to avoid succumbing to mere projection. Discriminating such events requires a self-critical awareness of unconscious tendencies towards narcissistic distortion, by which random or peripheral events are continually transformed into signs of an egocentric universe. No less crucial is the development and balanced interplay of multiple faculties of cognition: empirical, rational, emotional, relational, intuitive, symbolic. A capacity for acute yet balanced discernment has to be forged, founded not only on an alertness to meaningful pattern, but also on a disciplined mindfulness of the larger whole, within which the individual self seeks orientation. Today, a half century after Jung's original formulation of the principle of synchronicity, with both the concept and the phenomenon now so widely recognized, one can discern a typical sequence and progression in the nature of synchronistic events and responses. The first stage is usually marked by the experience of various ambiguously suggestive coincidences and patternings that may seem somewhat remarkable, curious, or even vaguely uncanny, but can still be regarded as perhaps merely fortuitous or subjective, and are therefore usually ignored and forgotten. Eventually, there may occur one or more especially powerful synchronicities, unambiguous in their coincidental force and precision of patterning, that have a revelatory effect on the individual and mark a decisive threshold in his or her psychological and spiritual development. Not infrequently, synchronicities of this category occur in association with births, deaths, crises, and other major turning points in life. On occasion, there may take place a sudden convergence of many such synchronicities, intricately interconnected, occurring in close proximity or in rapid succession, and having the effect of an overpowering epiphany of new meaning and purpose in the life of the individual. Over time, however, after this threshold has been crossed, a new attitude towards synchronicities often emerges as their frequency and character come to seem part of life's pervasive intelligence and artistry, less a paradigm-shifting revelation of a new order of reality, and more a continuing source of meaning and orientation with which to participate in life with greater sensitivity and intelligence. A disciplined alertness to significant pattern in the outer world as well as inner begins to develop as an essential aspect of living a more conscious life. The occurrence of synchronicities is seen as permitting a continuing dialogue with the unconscious and the larger whole of life, while also calling forth an aesthetic and spiritual appreciation of life's powers of symbolically resonant, complex patterning. Although Jung himself did not explicitly describe this later stage in his principal monograph on synchronicity, it is evident from many scattered passages in his writings and from the recollections and memoirs of others that he both lived his life and conducted his clinical practice in a manner that entailed a constant attention to potentially meaningful synchronistic events that would then shape his understanding and actions. Jung saw nature and one's surrounding environment as a living matrix of potential synchronistic meaning that could illuminate the human sphere. He attended to sudden or unusual movements or appearances of animals, flocks of birds, the wind, storms, the suddenly louder lapping of the lake outside the window of his consulting room, and similar phenomena as possessing possible symbolic relevance for the parallel unfolding of interior psychological realities. For the woman who had the dream of the golden scarab, the next day's synchronistic visitation through the window was dramatically transformative, whereas the same event for Jung represented a striking but not uncharacteristic example of the meaningful patterning of inner and outer events to which he had long before learned to be attentive. In sharp contrast to the modern worldview, Jung ceased to regard the outer world as merely a neutral background against which the human psyche pursued its isolated intrasubjective quest for meaning and purpose. Rather, all events, inner and outer, whether emanating from the human unconscious or from the larger matrix of the world, were recognized as sources of potential, psychological, and spiritual significance. From this perspective, not only the individual psyche and not only humanity's collective unconscious, but all of nature supported and moved the human psyche towards a larger consciousness of purpose and meaning. Each moment in time possessed a certain tangible character or quality which pervaded the various events taking place at that moment. It seems indeed as though time, far from being an abstraction, is a concrete continuum which contains qualities of fundamentals which can manifest themselves in relative simultaneous in different places and in a parallelism which cannot be explained, as in cases of simultaneous appearance of identical thoughts, symbols, or psychic conditions. whatever is born or done at this particular moment of time has the quality of this moment of time. Central to Jung's understanding of such phenomena was his observation that the underlying meaning or formal factor that linked the synchronistic inner and outer events, the formal cause, in Aristotelian terms, was archetypal in nature. Building on insights from Freud and drawing from the classical Platonic philosophical vocabulary and from esoteric traditions, Jung had long regarded and defined archetypes as the fundamental governing principles of the human psyche. On the basis of his own analyses, as well as those of others, not only of a diverse range of clinical phenomena, but also of the art, myths, and religions of many eras and cultures, Jung had come to view archetypes as innate symbolic forms and psychological dispositions that unconsciously structure and impel human behavior and experience at both the personal and collective level. They are self-portraits of the instincts and render human experience meaningful according to certain timeless universal patterns or forms: light and dark, birth and death, rebirth, the hero, the great mother, the child, the trickster, the shadow, good and evil, eros and logos, feminine and masculine, as well as more specifically personified and culturally inflected forms such as Aphrodite, Oedipus, Dionysus, Prometheus, Saturn, Shakti, Kali, Shiva, Wotan, Isis, and Sophia. Another major category of the archetypes comprises the mathematical principles of number and geometric form, as in the Pythagorean, Platonic tradition, and traditional sacred forms such as the mandala, the circle, and the cross. All these principles were seen as possessing a primordial, mythic, and numinous character grounded in the deepest layers of the psyche and expressing a collective unconscious shared by all human beings. For most of his career, Jung worked and wrote within the modern Cartesian Kantian philosophical framework of a basic division between the human subject and the objective world, and thus tended to restrict archetypes to the interior world of the human psyche. His view of archetypes in the early and middle periods of his career was generally equivalent to Kant's notion of a priori forms and categories. They were inherited psychological structures or dispositions that preceded and shaped the character of human experience but could not be said to transcend the human psyche. In his later work, however, and most explicitly in the context of his analysis of synchronicities, Jung moved towards a conception of archetypes as autonomous patterns of meaning that inform both psyche and matter, providing a bridge between inner and outer. Quote, synchronicity postulates a meaning which is a priori in relation to human consciousness and apparently exists outside man. End quote. Jung's later work thus intimated the ancient understanding of an ensouled world, of an anima mundi, in which the human psyche participates and with which it shares the same ordering principles of meaning. Jung noted parallels between synchronistic phenomena and the Chinese understanding of the Tao, the ancient Greek conception of the cosmic sympathy of all things, the Hermetic doctrine of microcosm and macrocosm, the medieval and Renaissance theory of correspondences, and the medieval concept of the pre-existent, ultimate unity of all existence, the unus mundus, the unitary world. In each case of synchronicity, Jung discerned an underlying archetypal coherence that linked the otherwise unconnected events, informed the larger field of meaning, and gave to the time of the synchronicity's occurrence a specific fundamental quality.